Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. You've arrived at a place where the glow of old television screens, the hum of rewinding tapes, and the softness of forgotten childhood dreams come alive once more. Each night will take a quiet journey back in time to sleepy suburbs, moonlit driveways, warm summer breezes, and the kind of memories that feel just a little too magical to be real. Here you don't need to worry. Just press play and let the night unfold. Before we begin tonight's story, let's take a moment to slow down. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it gently. And now, exhale slowly through your mouth. Let the day melt away with that breath. Again, breathe in deeply. Feel your shoulders soften. Now, release and let go of everything you don't need to carry right now. Imagine you're lying on a cozy bed in your childhood room. Outside, the wind hums softly. The light from a small lamp glows like a warm memory, and the sound of a distant VHS tape spinning fills the air with comfort. You are safe. You are still. And the night is yours. Let's begin tonight's story.
Do you remember what it felt like to fold a piece of lined notebook paper, heart racing, hands slightly trembling, trying to make it into a perfect little triangle? Can you recall the thrill of hiding your feelings between creases, hoping that the person you liked would unfold each fold with the same care you folded it? And why did we all know, somehow, how to fold those notes just right, without anyone ever teaching us? Stay with me until the end of this story to rediscover what those little love notes meant, and how, hidden under a bed in a shoebox, they preserved more than just ink and paper. They held our innocence, our longing, and the echoes of hearts. Too young to say things out loud. It was 1996. I was 13, and the world felt both impossibly big and safely small. My room still had the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles wallpaper my dad put up when I was 8, curling slightly at the corners now. A lava lamp glowed softly in the corner, and my Walkman was always close, tangled in the familiar ribbon of a Cranberries cassette tape. But the most precious thing in that room wasn't visible at first glance. It was hidden beneath my bed, inside a battered Reebok shoebox with a little duct tape on the corners. That box was full of love. Paper love. Folded love. Each note had its own personality. Some were folded like tight little squares, like secrets clenched in a fist. Others were triangles, sharp and compact, sometimes sealed with a strawberry-scented sticker from Lisa Frank. And then there were the hearts. Oh, the hearts. They took the longest to fold. The creases had to be just right, the symmetry nearly perfect, or it wouldn't lay flat when closed. I remember watching my fingers glide across the lines, smoothing each edge, tucking corners carefully, as if every fold was a spell, locking in whatever I couldn't say aloud. Was I the only one who felt like those notes were more than just paper? Each fold carried a weight. The triangle notes were for quick exchanges between classes, passed from palm to palm like contraband. The square ones often held song lyrics, sometimes in my best attempt at cursive, or little bubble letters if I was feeling especially expressive. But the heart folds, that was serious. A heart meant you had thought about what you were going to say all night. You probably rewrote it 3 times. It meant you cared. And yes, it meant you hoped they would care too. Her name was Julie. She sat 2 rows over in math class. She had braces with light blue rubber bands and always wore her hair half up, tied with those plastic butterfly clips that glittered under the fluorescent lights. We never talked in front of other people, but we wrote. Oh, we wrote. At first, it was just, do you like Mr. Caldwell? Circle yes or no. But then it became, what's your favorite episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark? And eventually, I thought about you while listening to Boys II Men last night, and every note she gave me was folded differently. One day it was a tiny envelope. Another day it was shaped like a star, so intricate I didn't want to open it for fear I wouldn't be able to recreate it. Didn't it feel like those shapes made the words inside even more special? I kept all of them. I still remember the scent of the paper, a little bit of pencil lead mixed with her strawberry-scented pen ink. Some had doodles in the corner, hearts with little arrows, smiley faces with freckles, a doodle of a Walkman with music notes floating out. One even had the corners burned slightly, like a pirate treasure map. She had written, "X marks the full I spot where I like you most," and underlined the X 3 times. Do kids today even know the joy of unfolding a note like that, layer by layer, as your chest tightens in anticipation? And what about the fear that the wrong person might find it? That the fold might tear and ruin the magic? That the teacher might intercept it and read it out loud? One day I got bold. I spent the entire evening before school trying to fold a note into a shape I hadn't done before. I wanted to impress her. I found an old book about origami at the library and tried to make a swan. It looked more like a sad duck, but I was proud of it. Inside, I wrote only one sentence. "You're the best part of my day." I left it in her locker during lunch, heart pounding in my ears. She didn't say anything in math class that day. My palms were sweaty, my foot bouncing nervously under the desk. Had she gotten it? Had she laughed? Had someone else seen it? The next morning, there was something in my locker, folded in the shape of a butterfly. Inside, "You make school feel like something out of a movie." I kept the duck. I swear I didn't stop smiling the rest of the week. Have you ever felt that kind of joy? The kind that makes your chest feel light and your stomach flip like it's summer again? We didn't date. Not really. We never even kissed. But we wrote each other for almost a year. Dozens of notes folded with care, stuffed into pencil cases, lockers, jacket pockets, and every one of them ended up in that shoebox under my bed. Sometimes I wonder if she still has the ones I wrote. Sometimes I wonder if she remembers what it felt like to fold paper into shapes that held our hearts inside. And sometimes, when I can't sleep, I pull that box out. I untie the old ribbon around it. I unfold one of the notes and read it slowly, like I'm 13 again, in that little room with the curling wallpaper and the soft glow of my lava lamp. Because no matter how much time has passed, those notes haven't faded, and neither has the feeling. It always started with a glance, not too obvious, never too long. A quick flicker of the eyes across the room, making sure the coast was clear. Then, the tiniest nod. That was the signal. From there, everything moved fast. The note, usually folded tightly into a triangle or square, would travel like a secret undercurrent through the classroom. From desk to desk, hand to hand, until it reached its destination. All without attracting the attention of Mr. Caldwell, who had the eyes of a hawk, and the patience of a tired parent on a long car ride. Passing notes in class felt like a mission. A silent, thrilling game where the stakes were higher than we dared admit. If you got caught, the embarrassment wasn't just having your handwriting exposed to everyone. It was worse. It was the teacher reading it out loud. And if you were really unlucky, you'd end up with a phone call home, or worse, a trip to the principal's office. But somehow, none of that ever stopped us. The risk was part of the magic. It made every exchange feel like a heartbeat, like a drum echoing quietly in your chest. Julie and I had developed a system over time. Nothing formal, just a kind of shared understanding built from weeks of practice and silent coordination. If I tapped my pencil 3 times against the desk and cleared my throat immediately after, it meant I had something to pass. If she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear twice in a row and looked at the clock, it meant she was ready to receive. Of course, these little signals only worked because we knew each other's patterns so well. We paid attention, and maybe that was half the point. We wanted to be seen, even in silence. One Monday morning, after a long weekend apart, I had folded a new note into a compact star shape. It was tricky, and I'd stayed up way too late trying to get the corners to line up. Inside, I had written a story. Not a long one, just a few sentences. It was about two explorers lost in the jungle, communicating with secret signs and folded maps, trying to find their way back to each other. I ended it with, "I think I'd still find you, even in the dark." I wasn't sure if it was too much, but I didn't care. The folds made it feel safer. Words were easier to say on paper when the paper was shaped like something special. I passed it during second period when Mr. Caldwell was explaining algebraic expressions. His back was to the class, chalk scraping the board. I waited for the right moment, watching as Julie shifted in her seat, glanced my way, and then stretched her arm slowly behind her. I slid the note into the hand of the boy next to me, Tony, who sat with slouched shoulders and never cared much for math, and he passed it on with practiced indifference. No one said a word. No one had to. It moved like a ghost across the room, unnoticed, untouched by time. Do you remember the feeling in your chest, watching your note make its way across the desks, praying no one else would read it, but also hoping it got there fast? Sometimes a note would stop mid-route. Maybe someone hesitated. Maybe they were unsure it was meant for them. Maybe the teacher had turned suddenly and thrown off the rhythm. I remember one time in history class, a note stalled with Casey Langston. He held it in his palm like it was radioactive, looking between me and Julie with wide eyes. For a second, I thought the whole thing was going to fall apart. But then he smirked, gave me the tiniest thumbs up, and slid the note across the edge of her desk when the teacher looked away. Julie opened it slowly, delicately, like she always did, careful not to tear the shape. And then came the best part. Her reaction. Sometimes a smile, sometimes a little shake of the head. Once, she pressed the note to her chest and mouthed, "Thank you." I lived for those moments, for the silent conversations no one else was having. Didn't it feel like those exchanges meant more because they were hidden? There was something sacred about the stealth of it, the way it forced us to be creative, to plan, to trust each other. We didn't have phones or instant messaging. We had to be brave enough to send our thoughts out into the world folded inside paper, hoping they'd be received the way we intended. And somehow, that made every note feel important, like it had weight, like it mattered. I still remember the day we almost got caught. It was right before winter break. The room smelled like peppermint gum and pencil shavings. Everyone was antsy, excited for 2 weeks of freedom. Mr. Caldwell was in a rare good mood, wearing a Santa hat that clashed terribly with his tan corduroy blazer. I had written Julie a note folded into the shape of a miniature envelope, sealed, with a snowflake sticker. Inside was a poem, a short, terrible poem, full of forced rhymes and adolescent emotion. But I meant every word. I passed it during a reading activity, thinking the timing was perfect. But Mr. Caldwell's eyes were sharper than I gave him credit for. Just as Julie reached for the note, he turned around, his voice slicing through the room like a knife through wrapping paper. "Miss Anders, would you care to share what you've just received?" he asked, his tone deceptively friendly. My heart sank. I felt every eye in the classroom shift in our direction. Julie's face turned the color of a candy cane. I wanted to disappear. But she was quick. With a grace I didn't expect, she slipped the note into her sleeve, straightened in her seat, and smiled. "Just an old gum wrapper," she said. I was going to throw it away. Mr. Caldwell paused, looked at her, then at me, then back to her. "Very well," he said finally, and turned back to the board. The room exhaled. I exhaled. And Julie shot me the smallest wink I had ever seen. How did we all know how to protect those notes? Like they were pieces of ourselves we couldn't afford to lose? After class, we passed in the hallway. She didn't say anything. She just slipped the note into my jacket pocket and kept walking. Later, in the privacy of my room, surrounded by my collection of cassette tapes and old Goosebumps books, I unfolded it and read her message. "Next time, let's fold it smaller." Too many eyes. And then a little heart drawn underneath, with our initials inside. Passing notes wasn't just about saying things. It was about saying them quietly, secretly, in a way that felt like whispering through paper. It was about timing and trust, risk and reward. We weren't just writing. We were dancing around the rules of the adult world, carving out little spaces where our feelings could be real, even if only for a moment between bells. Do you remember the exact sound of paper sliding over a desk? Or the heat in your cheeks when someone handed you a note, knowing what it might say? I do. And even now, all these years later, I sometimes catch myself folding a scrap of paper at my desk, shaping it into something familiar. A triangle, a heart, a square. Just to remember what it felt like. Just to hold that feeling again. For a minute. Because once upon a time we were brave enough to pass our hearts in class. And every fold was a risk we were willing to take. There was a note I kept in the back pocket of my denim jacket for months. It was worn thin, the folds permanently creased like memory lines on a map. I must have read it 100 times, maybe more. The paper had softened with time, the ink slightly, smudged at the edges from the oil of my fingertips. It wasn't long, just a few lines written in Julie's neat, slanted handwriting. Still, every time I unfolded it, it felt new, as if the meaning might shift if I looked hard enough. As if somewhere between the loops of her letters and the space between the words, there was a secret I had missed the first 99 times. The note read, "I feel like we talk even when we're silent. Isn't that strange? But I like it. I like you. Simple. Quiet. No exclamation marks, no declarations. But to me, it felt like music." I'd read it slowly, tracing the lines with my eyes like one might do with a favorite verse of poetry. And then I'd read it again, faster. Then, again, in a whisper, mouthing the words like a spell I wasn't ready to break. I began to memorize it without trying. It became a rhythm I carried with me. I'd sit by the window in my room at night, lights off, headphones on, and mouth the words into the dark, letting them melt into whatever song was playing. Do you know what it's like to hold something so small and feel like it holds the weight of your whole heart? I didn't show the note to anyone, not even my closest friend at the time, who kept a shoebox of secrets under her bed and promised never to tell. This one wasn't for sharing, it was just for me. Julie had handed it to me on a Tuesday afternoon when the sky looked like aluminum foil and the scent of impending rain lingered in the air. She had slipped it into my locker through the vent, the corner peeking out like a shy smile. I recognized the paper immediately, lined notebook stock, torn from the middle of her spiral. I had seen her do it so many times before, that careful tug to get the perforation just right. That afternoon, I didn't even wait to get home. I read it on the bus, holding it so close to my chest that the kid behind me couldn't see over my shoulder. I remember looking out the window, feeling the words echo against the rhythm of the ride and thinking, I think she really sees me. Don't. It was such a small thing, but it mattered more than I could explain. I wasn't popular. I didn't play sports or stand out in any special way. I was quiet, maybe even invisible to most. But this note made me feel known. It was like finding a message in a bottle, floating straight to my shore. I started keeping a collection after that. Not just that note, but others too. Some from Julie, some from other moments of passing connection. I kept them all in a shoebox under my bed, between comic books and old mix CDs. But that one note, hers, was different. That one I carried with me. Folded and refolded until the corners curled and the paper had the warmth of something alive. Some days, I'd pull it out before a test, just to breathe a little steadier. Other days, I'd read it after a fight with my parents or when the world felt like too much. And every time, I found something new, a softer tone in her words, a stronger truth hidden in the simplicity. I even convinced myself that she'd chosen her words carefully, that every line had a secret second meaning only I could unlock if I tried hard enough. Have you ever done that? Held on to something so tightly that you made it sacred? There's something about seeing a person's handwriting that brings them closer. You can almost hear their voice in the curves of each letter. Julie's lowercase y always dipped a little deeper than necessary, like it was pulling something up from underneath the page. Her eye was always dotted with a quick, light press, as if she didn't want to interrupt the flow. I started writing notes back, mimicking her style, practicing that rhythm of vulnerability and quiet daring. But nothing I wrote ever felt as perfect as that one she gave me. It was the kind of note that stayed with you long after the paper faded, the kind that lived more in your memory than your hands. One evening I sat on the floor with it again, the room quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. I had the note unfolded in my lap, and I traced each word with my finger, pretending it was her hand instead. I thought about how she must have written it. Did she pause between lines? Did she doubt the last sentence? Did she imagine me reading it over and over like this? I didn't know. I never asked. It was better not to. Some magic is only real when left unexplained. Later that week, in class, I noticed she was wearing the bracelet I made her from colored thread and safety pins. She caught me looking, smiled just a little, then looked back down at her book. We didn't exchange notes that day. We didn't need to. Some days, the silence between us said more than paper ever could. Still, that note stayed in my pocket like a lighthouse. And I'd read it again when the day felt too loud, when people's voices filled the halls like static. I'd read it when I didn't feel brave, or when the world seemed too big. Because in those few lines, Julie had built a tiny, indestructible world. One where I was enough, just as I was. And when I read it now, years later, I don't just see the words. I see the bus ride, the storm clouds, the crooked smile she gave me in homeroom the next day. I see every version of myself who held that note and found a reason to smile. Funny how something so small can echo for so long. The shoebox had started as a plain cardboard container from a pair of white Reeboks my mom bought me at JCPenney. The kind with that unmistakable synthetic smell and the squeaky new soles that felt too clean to walk on. The box was nothing special. At first, just a home for old tissue paper and brand tags. But somewhere between one note and the next, it became something sacred, a vault of invisible treasures. A time capsule only I had the key to. I remember sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor, the blinds half closed, afternoon light pooling gently on the carpet like spilled honey. I was 12 the first time I put a note in that box. I folded it slowly, then added a cassette tape I had copied from the radio. One side filled with slow jams from Boys II Men, the other with my own voice reading out poems I'd written but never dared to share. There was something so solemn about tucking it inside, like burying a secret in soft earth. But where could I keep it? Somewhere my sister wouldn't snoop, somewhere my parents wouldn't think to clean. That's when I pulled the bed away from the wall and saw the hollow between the baseboard and the carpet edge. It wasn't much, just a little dip in the floor where the wood sloped slightly inward, invisible unless you were lying flat on your stomach, flashlight in hand. Do you remember the first time you hid something because it felt like it held a piece of your soul? That corner became the shoebox's permanent home. I slid it under the bed, then pushed a dusty backpack in front of it as camouflage. I even placed an old sock over the box lid, just in case anyone caught a glimpse. Looking back now, it sounds almost silly. But at the time, it felt like espionage, like I was guarding state secrets. And in a way, I was. Secrets of the heart, emotions too big for my body, too delicate for the open air. Inside that shoebox were layers of myself, pressed between folded notebook pages. There were letters never sent, and others passed in a hurry under desks. Scribbled confessions, apologies, doodles of our names linked by a heart, lyrics written in bubble letters. One day I even tucked in a candy wrapper because it was from a day we laughed so hard in the back of the bus that the driver had to tell us to quiet down. That wrapper felt like a symbol, a reminder of how bright the world could be when it was just the two of us. Sometimes, after everyone had gone to sleep, I'd pull the box out and just sit with it. No rush, no noise, just me and the quiet pulse of everything I had felt and couldn't say out loud. I'd unfold the notes and smooth them flat with the palm of my hand, breathing in the faint scent of pencil lead, eraser dust, and old paper. I'd read her words again, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing, always remembering. Was there a note you held longer than you should have, just because it reminded you of who you were? The shoebox was more than storage. It was a diary written in someone else's hand, a place where love could live untouched by time. I'd talk to it like a friend, whisper to it when I was too shy to speak to her in person. I believed, foolishly or not, that somehow the box held echoes of our moments, and that by keeping it hidden, I could protect those memories from fading. I knew I couldn't keep it under the bed forever. There were risks, a surprise room cleaning, a borrowed flashlight, one accidental nudge of a backpack. But even so, I never moved it. That little space under the bed became a sacred boundary. Anyone crossing it was trespassing into my heart. One day, my dad decided to fix the squeaky floorboards in my room. I panicked, imagining him pulling back the carpet, revealing my treasure to the bright, unforgiving light. I came home from school and tiptoed into my room with my breath held tight. But there it was, untouched. The bed had been shifted, the carpet smoothed back into place, but the box was right where I left it. I let out a quiet laugh, part relief, part disbelief. That day, I added a new note to the box. Even when the floor moves, this space stays mine. I think back to that now and realize how much I needed that box, not just for her notes, but for my own voice, scribbled in margins and back covers. It was my safe, my confessional, my hope chest. And hiding it wasn't just about fear of discovery, but about preserving something too precious for the outside world. In that box, I didn't need to explain myself. I just existed, raw and whole. There were nights when I'd lie on my bed and imagine the shoebox glowing faintly beneath me, like a lantern buried in the floor. I'd think about the words resting quietly inside, like sleeping birds. And I'd smile, knowing that no matter how loud the world became, I still had that quiet place to return to, a place untouched by noise, time, or change. Do you still remember where you kept your own secret treasures? I think we all had a version of that box. Maybe it wasn't cardboard, maybe it was a drawer, or a notebook, or a folder tucked behind old textbooks. But we all had something we protected, something we weren't ready to let the world see. And maybe, just maybe, those things helped shape who we became. I never told Julie about the shoebox. Not then. Maybe I was afraid it would make things too real. Or maybe I liked having something that was only mine. But part of me wishes I had. That I could have shown her just how much those pieces of her meant to me. How carefully I guarded them. How deeply I felt every folded note. Years later, I found that shoebox again while helping my mom clear out the attic. The lid had warped a little from age. The papers were yellowing at the corners. But when I opened it, the scent of the past wrapped around me like an old hoodie pulled from the back of a closet. And there, right on top, was the first note I ever got from her. I held it to my chest, just like I had on the bus all those years ago. And for a moment, everything came rushing back. The whispers, the stolen glances, the soft rustle of paper passed between hands. Funny how a box so small could carry so much. There's a kind of intimacy in decorating something that holds your secrets. It's like whispering to yourself through art. That's how it felt the day I decided to decorate the shoebox. Until then, it had remained plain, its brown cardboard, sides quietly absorbing the weight of folded letters, memories, and time. But something shifted inside me. A need not just to preserve the past, but to honor it. To give the box the identity it had earned. To make it not just a hiding place, but a monument. I remember spreading old magazines across my bedroom floor, a pair of dull scissors in one hand, a glue stick in the other. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind where the light hangs slow and golden and the world outside feels paused. I had no plan, just instinct. I tore out anything that caught my eye. Pictures of mixtapes, cartoon hearts, faded Polaroid borders, even words clipped from ads like forever, magic, and yours. I wasn't just cutting paper. I was carving out pieces of my longing. The first thing I glued on was a red sticker shaped like a cassette tape that said, "Love Mix." I placed it right in the center of the lid. Around it, I arranged torn pieces of notebook paper with tiny doodles I'd saved, stick figures holding hands, clouds with smiling faces, hearts with wings. I added glitter glue in the corners, little stars drawn with a blue gel pen, and in one quiet moment, I wrote her name in tiny print near the top, then covered it with a clear sticker so it wouldn't fade. I think part of me hoped it would keep her memory safe, like sealing a spell. It wasn't just decoration, it was devotion. I worked slowly, layering stickers, photos, and scribbled phrases, like a mosaic built from the pieces of us. Every image told a story. The smiley face with sunglasses from a school fundraiser sticker sheet, the clipped magazine photo of a Ferris wheel that reminded me of the carnival we'd never gone to, the sparkly silver star because she once said, I reminded her of the night sky. Each edition was an act of remembering, of feeling, of loving in silence. Do you remember the first time you tried to turn something ordinary into something sacred? When I was done, I stepped back and stared at the box like it was a painting. It didn't look perfect. The glue had smudged in places, and one corner was bent from where I'd pressed too hard. But none of that mattered. It felt alive now, like it breathed with me. A tiny cathedral made of stickers, clippings, and careful longing. I ran my fingers over the lid slowly, letting my fingertips trace the edges of every chosen memory. I didn't show it to anyone, not even Julie. Especially not Julie. It wasn't for her to see. It was about her, but it belonged to me. A shrine I built with quiet hands for the girl who filled my chest with thunder when she smiled at me across the room. A girl whose words I had memorized like scripture. A girl who, without knowing it, had helped me create something beautiful in the quiet corners of my life. Sometimes, late at night, I'd pull the box out just to look at the lid. I didn't even need to open it. Just staring at the collage made me feel something soft, something safe. I'd rest my hand on top like I was greeting an old friend. I remember one night I fell asleep with the box beside me, and in the morning, I found a bit of glitter stuck to my cheek. I didn't brush it off. I left it there for the rest of the day, like a secret badge only I understood. It wasn't just a shoebox anymore. It was a scrapbook, a reliquary, a small monument to everything. We were and everything I couldn't say out loud. In a world that often moved too fast, where things got lost and feelings faded, this little box stood still. It became my way of pressing pause, of bottling the feelings I was too young to name but too honest to ignore. Was there ever something you made just for yourself, not to show off, not to share, but simply to feel closer to who you were? In time, the box began to wear around the edges. Some of the stickers peeled, the corners softened. But I never replaced them. I liked the way it aged, how it wore its years like a denim jacket with stories stitched into every seam. I even added new clippings now and then, long after the notes stopped coming. A movie ticket from a film that reminded me of her. A fortune cookie slip that said, an old memory will warm your heart this week. I believed it. I always did. It was strange how something so small could hold so much. But maybe that's the magic of memory, how it stretches the ordinary into something eternal. The box sat in its quiet place under my bed, hidden from the world but glowing inside me. Every time I looked at it, I felt like I was 12 again. Hopeful, nervous, completely cracked open and totally alive. One day, years later, I showed it to someone, not to compare stories or impress, just because I needed to say, this mattered, this was real. I think part of me wanted to be witnessed, to know that the boy who decorated a shoebox for love wasn't lost in time, that he still existed, somewhere inside me, holding a glue stick in one hand and a paper heart in the other. And when I placed the box in their hands, I said nothing. I just watched as they ran their fingers gently over the collage, reading each word, smiling at each sticker. I didn't need to explain. The box said everything. There were moments when I'd pull out a note not to read it, but simply to breathe it in. It wasn't planned. It just happened, an instinct, like muscle memory tied to longing. My fingers would slide over the worn edges, unfold the creases, gently, and before my eyes could even scan the words, my face would lean forward, almost involuntarily, drawing in whatever might still remain of her. A whisper of perfume, a trace of hallway air, a fingerprint of time left behind in scent. I didn't know what I was searching for exactly. Maybe her shampoo, maybe the subtle sweetness of a scented lotion, or just the warmth of paper that had been pressed close to her chest. Most of the time, there was nothing. The scent had faded. But every once in a while, if the weather was just right, or if the box had been sealed tight enough, I would catch the faintest trace of something that didn't belong to the present. And I'd close my eyes, and I'd stay there. Have you ever missed someone so deeply that you believed even air could remember them? One note, in particular, always held something. It was written in purple ink on lined notebook paper with a small drawing of a heart in the corner. The words were casual, a joke about a classmate's hair, a reminder that we had a math quiz, and a line at the bottom that said, "I like talking to you more than anyone else here." That line always did something to my stomach, but the paper itself, it smelled like a moment. Not like a perfume I could name, but like something human, something worn close to the skin. I'd hold it near my face and inhale softly, afraid to break the spell. Sometimes I'd convince myself it was gone, that the scent had finally disappeared for good. But then I'd catch it again, mid-breath, like a ghost slipping through the cracks. And just like that, I'd be back in the hallway by her locker, back in the classroom with the flickering fluorescent lights, back in my seat watching her twist strands of her hair between her fingers as she looked at the blackboard, all from one inhale. It's strange how our senses betray us, or maybe they preserve us. When memory starts to blur, it's smell that brings everything back into focus. The way her laugh echoed in the stairwell, the way she doodled on her jeans, the way she once handed me a note so quickly her fingers brushed mine. I didn't need a photograph, I just needed a breath. There were nights when I'd sit on the floor, the box open beside me, and one note in my hand. I'd bring it to my face, eyes closed, and let everything else fall away. The ticking of the clock, the hum of the fridge, the buzz of distant cars. None of it mattered. For those seconds, I wasn't alone. She was there, in the scent, in the paper, in the silence that followed. I began associating certain emotions with smells I couldn't even name. A trace of vanilla meant safety. A hint of citrus felt like surprise. Something powdery meant comfort. I wondered if she knew what she was leaving behind. If she ever sprayed perfume before school and thought of me catching it later, long after the moment had passed. Or if it was just life rubbing off naturally, skin and air and warmth pressed into the folds of folded paper. And it wasn't always about her. Sometimes it was about who I was when I first smelled it. A boy with too many feelings, unsure of what to do with them. A kid who thought maybe, just maybe, the universe had handed him a miracle wrapped in notebook paper. I missed being that boy sometimes, brave in small, quiet ways, fragile but willing. Did you ever try to bottle a feeling, hoping it would last just a little longer? Eventually, the scents faded completely, even the strongest one, no matter how tightly I closed the box, no matter how carefully I folded the paper back. Time has a way of softening things, stealing the sharpness and leaving only echoes. But I didn't stop smelling the notes. Even after I knew they were empty of scent, it wasn't about what I found anymore. It was about what I remembered. The act itself had become its own ritual, a quiet promise to never forget how it felt, to be close to something pure. Now, years later, sometimes when I walk past someone wearing the same perfume, or when a gust of warm wind carries something familiar, I stop. I turn my head. I wait. It's never her, of course, but for a second, it could be. And in that second, I smile. Because I once loved someone so deeply that even paper tried to hold on to her. And sometimes when you miss a person that much, the smallest breath can carry the whole story. It happened on a rainy Sunday, years after high school had become just a faded folder in my memory. The kind of day where the sky presses low and gray, and you find yourself rummaging through closets not out of need but curiosity. I was looking for a box of old CDs, maybe some mixtapes I had made on blank Memorex discs. But what I found instead was a shoebox covered in dust, its edges soft and its lid warped just slightly with time. My heart hesitated before my hands did. I hadn't seen that box in so long, I'd forgotten what I had done with it. But the second my fingers brushed over its faded surface, I knew exactly what it was. The old stickers had curled at the corners, a sticker of Lisa Frank's glittering. Dolphin had lost its shine. A magazine clipping of a boy in a flannel shirt, the one she always said looked like me, had yellowed around the edges. There were faint pencil doodles in the corner I vaguely remembered drawing late at night, usually while on the phone with her, each one a little doorway back to who I used to be. Isn't it strange how time can pause the moment you touch something you thought was gone? I sat down right there on the floor, legs crossed like I used to when we'd sprawl across the carpet to talk for hours. I lifted the lid, slow and careful, as if I were unsealing a memory too fragile for the present. And there they were, the notes, dozens of them, folded into shapes, some still sharp at the creases, others softened from years of being forgotten. They didn't smell like her anymore, not really, but they smelled like old paper and ink, like innocence sealed in time. And that was enough. The first one I unfolded was written in blue pen. "Don't fall asleep in Mr. Carter's class again, LOL. You were drooling. Kinda cute, though." I laughed softly, not just at the memory of the moment, but at the fact that someone once cared enough to notice even the way I drooled. I could hear her voice in my head reading the words. That gentle, teasing way she had, always managing to make me smile even when I was tired or grumpy or half awake in third period. One by one, I began reading them. Each note was like opening a time capsule sealed by handwriting. The loops of her letters, the way she dotted her eyes with tiny hearts during our flirtier weeks, and then switched to plain dots when she was annoyed. It was all there, encoded, in ink, as if her mood could travel through time and land right in my chest again. Do you know what it's like to hold a piece of your past in your hand and feel it beating like a second heart? There was a note where she apologized for snapping at me when I forgot her birthday. Another where she wrote an entire paragraph just to tell me that her cat had thrown up on her Converse. And there was one that simply said, "I miss you already, and we were just together like 10 minutes ago." That one made me stop and exhale. The kind of note that reminds you how much someone once loved the sound of your name, the sight of your face, the way you laughed at dumb things. The paper had thinned, the ink slightly bled from age, but the feelings hadn't dulled. If anything, they'd grown sharper. I wasn't that boy anymore, not exactly. But for a moment, I was. For a moment, I could feel the cafeteria tray in my hands again. I could hear the chatter of our classmates, the scraping of chairs against the floor, the quiet thrill of a folded triangle being slipped under a textbook when the teacher turned around. Those moments, so small back then, now shimmered like gold, found one note I had never opened. Maybe I had hidden it too well, afraid of its contents, or maybe I'd just lost it among the folds. It was sealed with a piece of Scotch tape, and on the outside, in her messy, rushed scrawl, it said, "Only read this when you really, really need to smile." My fingers trembled as I peeled the tape, careful not to rip the paper. Inside, she'd written a list. 20 things she liked about me. Some silly, "You do the robot dance when you're nervous," and some that nearly broke me. "You always listen, even when I don't say anything out loud. Have you ever discovered something from the past that made you love yourself a T? Little more?" It was almost too much. Sitting on the floor with rain tapping against the windows, I felt 17 again. Awkward, hopeful, loved. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about how we had made something real in a time when everything felt uncertain. Two kids passing paper secrets, carving something meaningful out of lined notebook sheets. I sat there for hours. I didn't notice how dark it had gotten. The world outside faded, and all that remained was ink and memory. Eventually, I folded the notes back, one by one, carefully as if returning birds to a nest. I closed the box and slid it back under the bed, not to hide it, but to keep it close. Because sometimes, you don't need to relive everything to feel it again. You just need to hold it, to see the words, to be reminded that once, a part of, you was known so deeply, so truly, that someone could write you a poem disguised as a silly note. There was a shift after I found that old shoebox. Something quiet, almost imperceptible, but persistent. Like a song I hadn't heard in years replaying faintly in the back of my mind. For days I walked through my routines with a strange feeling trailing behind me, something soft but heavy. I kept thinking about her handwriting, the curve of her L's, the way she'd write sideways on the page when she was running out of space. I thought about how much I missed being known that way, in fragments and scribbles, through words written by hand when feelings were too fragile to be spoken out loud. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I started writing again, not on my phone, not in an email. I found a half-used notebook in the bottom drawer of my desk, the one I hadn't opened in years, the one with an old sticker of a broken heart on the cover. And I tore out the pages that had grocery lists and reminders scribbled across them. Then I started from the back, like I used to do in high school when I didn't want anyone to know I was writing something personal. I wrote her name first, just her name, on the top of the page. My pen paused there longer than I expected. It wasn't that I forgot how to spell it. I just didn't know how to talk to her anymore. But then the words started coming, slowly at first, like someone walking into a cold ocean, testing the water with their toes. And then suddenly, I was swimming in it. My feelings, my memories, my unsaid things, all pouring out like I had been holding them in for years. Which, in a way, I had. I didn't plan what to say. I just let it happen. The first note was only a few lines long. Do you still listen to that old playlist we made in math class? I found it the other day. Every song hit me like a time machine. I folded the page and placed it in a new envelope. I didn't have her address anymore, of course, but that wasn't the point. I wasn't writing to be read. I was writing to feel something again. Something real. The next night I wrote again. Sometimes I wonder if you remember the way I used to walk you to your bus, even when it made me late. You always thought I did it just to be nice, but it was my favorite part of the day. And the next, I never told you how scared I was the day you cried in the hallway after getting that call from home. I didn't know how to help, so I just sat there. I hope sitting there was enough. It became a ritual, quiet, unannounced. I wrote these notes late at night, when the world was silent and the past felt the closest. I wrote them like confessions, not of guilt, but of gratitude, of fear, of hope. I poured into them the kind of truths you can't say when you're young because you don't yet know how much they matter. Some notes were soft. I kept your favorite song in every playlist I ever made, even after you left. Some were raw. You made me want to be a better person, and for a while I think I was. And some were just fragments, unfinished thoughts I couldn't fully explain. If you had asked me to stay, there was something healing about it. Writing to someone who wasn't there. Writing without the pressure of a response. It felt like reaching into the past, not to change it, but to make peace with it. To say the things I couldn't back then. The notes stayed in a drawer, tied together with an old shoelace. I never intended to send them. They were mine. My way of saying goodbye, or maybe holding on, depending on the day. Have you ever tried to speak to someone who only lives in your memory? Sometimes I'd write and end up crying, not the loud kind. Just a silent stream, like a faucet left on, too long. Sometimes I'd laugh at something I remembered mid-sentence and scribble it down before it vanished. You once dared me to wear 2 different shoes to class, and I did. Everyone laughed, and you said, "Now they're all looking at you the way I do." That was the first time I blushed without being embarrassed. Writing became a kind of therapy I didn't know I needed. A way to connect not only with her, but with myself. With the version of me who had felt all those things so deeply and didn't know yet that feelings like that could fade, or worse, linger. I started noticing the small details in my life again. The colors of the sky during sunset. The way music sounded different when I was in a nostalgic mood. I even began doodling in the margins again, little stars and arrows like I used to, like I was 17 with a crush all over again. And through all of it, I never once addressed the notes with "Dear," her name. Instead, I just wrote. Because the truth was, I was speaking more to myself than to her. To the boy who didn't know how to say the right thing back then. To the one who still wonders what might have happened. If the timing had been kinder, if we'd had just a little more time, I never let anyone see them. Not friends, not family, not even in passing. They weren't for the world. They were for the quietest parts of me. The ones that still listened for her laugh in crowded rooms or caught the scent of her perfume in the air and turned around too. Quickly. The parts that still whispered her name like a prayer or a secret, and maybe, just maybe, she did the same. Maybe she kept her own notes. Maybe there's a shoebox in her closet too, or a drawer full of folded papers she couldn't throw away. Maybe she wrote me letters she never sent, sealed with invisible ink, tucked between chapters of old books. Maybe one day she'll find them, like I found mine, and read them in silence, with that same slow ache in her chest. And maybe she'll smile, or cry, or both. And that would be enough, because not all love stories need an ending to matter. Some live in unfinished letters, in feelings too big for closure, in words we write only for ourselves. The first time I ever shared the shoebox with someone else was during a sleepover years ago, before the weight of adulthood settled over everything like morning fog. Back then, the world was smaller, but somehow felt infinitely more magical. My best friend Ellie had come over for the weekend. We had our usual setup, snacks that crinkled too loudly, old movies we never watched all the way through, and blankets tossed across the floor like little islands in a sea of secrets. It was one of those nights when everything felt softer, when time slowed down just enough to let truth sneak in. We had just finished painting our nails a ridiculous shade of glittery purple when she asked about the decorated box on the shelf above my desk. "What's that?" she said, pointing with her freshly painted pinky, careful not to smudge the polish. "You always hide it like it's made of gold." I remember hesitating, not out of distrust, but because sharing it would mean unlocking a version of myself I had only ever let exist in private. I stared at the shoebox, its edges worn and decorated with magazine cutouts, faded stickers, and doodles that no longer made sense. For a moment, I thought about lying, about saying it was just junk or old art supplies. But something inside me, maybe the same thing that had driven me to start writing again, whispered, "Let her in." So I stood up, reached for the box, and brought it back with both hands like it was something sacred. "This," I said softly, "is kind of a time capsule, of feelings mostly." Ellie's eyes lit up in the glow of the fairy lights we had, strung around my bedroom weeks earlier. "Are they love notes?" she asked, almost in a whisper, like she already knew the answer and didn't want to break the spell by being too loud. I nodded, a little shy. "Some of them were sent. Some were never meant to be." She sat cross-legged beside me, her chin resting on her hand, and waited. I opened the box and slowly pulled out a few envelopes, the edges frayed, some of them still faintly scented, others smudged from too much handling. I held one up and offered it to her. "This was the first one she ever gave me," I said. "We passed it during history class. It just said, 'You look tired, but kind of beautiful that way.'" Ellie smiled like someone witnessing a sunrise. She didn't laugh or tease me like other friends might have. She just let it land. "Can I read more?" "Only if you promise not to fall in love with her too." We giggled, quietly at first, then louder as the tension gave way to something lighter. Over the next hour, we read through the notes together, taking turns holding them like fragile relics. Each one became a story, and every story unraveled a new detail Ellie had never heard before. About the way her handwriting tilted more when she was nervous. About the time she doodled hearts in the margins and then scratched them out. About the note I found in my locker on the day I failed my math test. It had just one sentence. "This grade doesn't define you. I see you." We whispered our way through memories like we were telling ghost stories. Only the ghosts weren't scary. They were beautiful, tender, human. Ellie asked questions I hadn't prepared for. Did she ever say she loved you? Why did it end? Do you think she ever wrote you a note that she never gave you? Some questions I could answer. Others I could only wonder about. But she didn't push. She just listened the way best friends do, with her whole heart open. At some point, Ellie leaned back on a pillow, holding one of the notes gently in both hands. "It's kind of amazing," she said. "You kept all this. Most people would have tossed it or forgotten." I shrugged. I think I just couldn't let go. Not because I was still in love, but because those words were the first time I ever felt really seen. Like someone reached into the quietest parts of me and said, "Yeah, I get it." There was a long silence after that. Not awkward, just full. She placed the note back in the box and looked at me with something warm in her eyes. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she said. "Seriously, it makes me want to keep something like this too." "You should," I said. "Even if you never show it to anyone." As the night wore on, we kept the box open between us like a campfire, glowing with stories. Ellie eventually pulled out a pen and a blank scrap of paper from her own backpack. "Can I write one?" she asked. I nodded, curious. She scribbled quickly, folded the paper, and handed it to me. "For the box," she said. When she went to brush her teeth before bed, I opened it. It read, "You loved someone with your whole heart and had the courage to remember it. That's something I admire more than you know." I placed the note on top of the others. That sleepover became something of a turning point. Not just because I shared the shoebox, but because it reminded me that love isn't just about the person you felt it for. It's also about the way that feeling ripples through time, touching other people, even if they weren't there when it happened. Ellie didn't need to have lived my story to understand it. She just needed to sit with it, and she did. Over time, the box grew heavier. Not just with notes, but with new additions. A photo booth strip from a fair we all went to one summer. A napkin with lipstick marks from a diner where we used to eat after school. A torn movie ticket. All of it became part of the shrine, and every now and then, when the world got too loud, Ellie would ask, "Want to take out the box?" And I'd nod, and we'd sit quietly together, reading through old emotions like sacred scriptures. Sometimes we'd laugh until our stomachs hurt. Other times one of us would tear up and pretend it was just dust in the air. There's something timeless about shared secrets, something holy. To open that box wasn't just to look back. It was to honor every version of ourselves that dared to feel deeply. And in sharing it with Ellie, I realized I hadn't just been holding on to an old love. I had been holding on to the courage it took to feel something real. There is a quiet kind of magic in knowing that something as simple as a shoebox could hold an entire love story. Not a story told through endless posts, hashtags, or perfectly curated photos on social media. No, this story was written in ink and paper held together by trembling hands and open hearts. It was a story that didn't need an audience of thousands, just the patient silence of the night and the privacy of a small, sacred space. When I finally closed the lid on that shoebox for the last time, it wasn't because I wanted to shut away the past. It was because I had come to understand what the box really represented. It wasn't just a container of notes, stickers, or doodles. It was a symbol of a time when love was raw and unfiltered. When every word mattered because it was chosen carefully, every pause held meaning, and every little secret felt like a treasure. I remembered the first time I held that box in my hands. The rough edges of the paper, the faded colors, the scent of old ink mingled with the faint traces of perfume. Each letter inside was a moment frozen, a confession whispered between hurried classes, a hope barely dared to be spoken aloud, a promise that existed in a fragile, fleeting present. There was no need for likes or shares to validate what those notes meant. The love captured inside was real simply because it had been felt so deeply. I thought about how, in a world obsessed with speed and instant gratification, that slow, deliberate process of writing, folding, and hiding those notes away felt revolutionary. It was a protest against the disposable nature of modern connection. That shoebox was a time capsule of vulnerability and trust. Each note inside was a pulse, a heartbeat echoing through the years. Some were shy and awkward, others bold and daring, Some spoke of butterflies and late-night talks, others of fears and heartbreaks barely understood at the time. All of them, together, told a story richer and more complicated than any digital timeline could capture. I knew then that love doesn't always need grand gestures or viral moments. Sometimes it just needs a piece of paper, a pen, and a heart brave enough to put feelings into words. It reminded me of the power of simplicity, of the beauty in intimacy, and the strength in holding on to something private in a world that constantly demands exposure. Looking back, I realized those notes shaped who I was in ways I hadn't noticed before. They taught me how to listen to the quiet whispers inside, how to cherish fleeting moments, and how to love without needing recognition or applause. The shoebox wasn't just a relic. It was a mirror reflecting my growth, my pain, my joy. I also thought about how, despite the passage of time, some parts of me still reached for that shoebox in moments of doubt. When the noise of the world grew too loud, or when love felt too complicated, I would remember those handwritten words and find solace. They were proof that love could be gentle and patient, enduring even when life tried to rewrite the story. And so, as I placed the shoebox back on the shelf, carefully locking it away, I felt a profound gratitude for the person who had written those notes, for the friendships that had helped me carry the weight of memory, and for the quiet moments when I believed in love's possibility. The shoebox reminded me that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we keep to ourselves. Stories that don't need validation, just an open heart willing to remember. And even if the world forgets, those stories live on in the corners of our souls, shaping the way we love and who we become. In the end, that shoebox was more than just paper and stickers. It was a testament to a kind of love that doesn't fade with time. A love that doesn't need an audience to exist. A love that starts with a note passed quietly in a classroom and stretches across years, carried in silence and held with care. And for me, that was more than enough.